All right, people have been asking me my thoughts over a stock that Cathie Wood has over 100 million shares over. I haven't done a video on this in the past couple months, so I want to talk about it. Now, this stock, to me, is an interesting stock. It's an interesting company. We're going to go through the core bull thesis and bear thesis in this video, and we're also going to discuss why I think Cathie Wood is buying up a lot of shares. Now, before I get into it, first thing is first, I think this is a highly speculative company. To me, this has the potential to give Tesla-esque returns over the next 10 to 20 years. And there's, some decent logical analysis for why that could potentially happen. We're talking about 10, 20x. But it also has a chance to go bankrupt and completely fail. So if you do any due diligence on this company, please remember, because it is in the biotech space, it is risky. There is upside. There's potential. A firm like Cathie's Arc Innovation and the research they do validating a lot of the bull case potential for the stock is great. But they could be wrong, because we've seen Cathie be wrong about Roku, Zoom, Teladoc. I mean, all these stocks that, we're supposed to go to the moon and be the growth innovation epicenters of the world. Maybe that's going to happen, but so far it has not happened. Now, what is the name of this company? The name of this company is called Ginkgo Bioworks. And let's go through a little bit of their full year 2022 financial highlights, because they had earnings a couple weeks ago, and then I'll give my thoughts on why I think Cathie Wood is buying. Over the past 5 weeks, Cathie Wood has bought about 4.8 million shares of this company. This is on top of the already 115 million shares she has. So she's obviously a fan of this company. I will explain why, but here are some of their highlights. So full year 2022 total revenue was 478 million, up from 314 million. So they increased revenue by 52%. Their Foundry revenue, which is the thing they use to create services, it's not the same as Palantir Foundry, but it's called Foundry for other companies that use their services, was 144 million, up 113 million from the year, an increase of 27%. And full year 2022 biosecurity revenue, this is a business they basically created during the age of COVID, which now has ended, so that revenue is substantially going to decrease, but nonetheless, they were able to capture that in 2022. Revenue of 334 million, up from 201 million in the prior year, an increase of 66%. Now, if we go down to their full year 2023 guidance, they expect to add 100 new cell programs. I'll talk about what that means, but 100 new cell programs is actually a really good thing. They added 59, I believe, in the full year before, and their total revenue of 275 million. Now, 275 million is a decrease from 478 million, but that is still about 50% growth, because if you exclude the biosecurity business and if you exclude the downstream effects of the revenue they want to get from other companies using their platform, which again I will talk about in a second, it is still a pretty good growth rate. They expect Foundry revenue of at least 175 million, again excluding the impact of any downstream value share, which is really important. And biosecurity revenue, they expect at least $100 million, even though the core business of biosecurity was being able to advise many different institutions on COVID security. COVID is now over, but they're still going to be able to have a lasting business that enables them to have more biosecurity. Ginkgo Bioworks was also invited to the White House back in September to talk about biosecurity and engage in different policies that the administration is working on in order to protect themselves from the next pandemic, because we all know that, another pandemic could be likely to happen. So overall growth for the year wasn't too bad. Overall growth going into the next year is not too bad as well. The thing that a lot of people hated was insider selling and stock-based compensation. Stock-based compensation, management addressed it in their latest earnings call by saying they are not issuing out any more stock. So they kind of recognized how big of a concern it was. They justified it a little bit by talking about how the early employees were there since 2008, and they're entitled to some level of shares, obviously, in this as the company grows and the company becomes successful. But they did make a promise to not issue new shares to employees. So stock-based compensation is likely going to minimize dramatically. And in terms of insider selling, I don't have the best answer for this one. This is something I don't like to see. This is actually something why I've been more hesitant to add to the position. But now that it's getting to $1.40, I'm a bit more excited. Again, it is risky. This is a stock that could easily double, triple, even quadruple, in my opinion. It's easily a company that could go under $1 and be fully bankrupt because it is in the biotech space. And so that's kind of the way I'm seeing it. All right, let's talk about why I think ARK is buying this. Ginkgo Bioworks is a platform. It is not a traditional biotech company. Most biotech companies basically have a drug, and if that drug gets approved by the FDA or doesn't get approved by the FDA, that is the basis for which the stock gains any legitimacy. And I know this because I have a decent amount of money, around 15, 20K inside of a biotech company. For the past 3 years, it's been stuck there, and it's been stuck there, right? Because their drug still doesn't get to market. Drugs always get complicated, all this stuff. I think everyone, when they enters the stock market, they do something dumb like buy a risky biotech because hey, why not? And yeah, that's what happened to me. So I know what it feels like intimately to deal with a biotech stock, and if our drug fails after 3 years of holding it, the company's done. And that's kind of the risk you take when you own a biotech. Now, Ginkgo is not a traditional biotech, and the reason they're not a traditional biotech is because they decided to approach the market fundamentally differently, which was, what if we create the iOS App Store for startups? It is incredibly difficult for a biotech startup to get started, primarily in the synthetic biology space, which is what Ginkgo specializes in. Synthetic biology is, think of this cup of coffee and the plastic that was used to create this. A company has to do that. There are lots of raw materials and processes that go into actually building out that plastic, building out the materials in order to make that into a real cup. There are companies that specialize in all that. There's an entire value chain and supply chain that engages in that process. Now, synthetic biology is saying, what if we could create things that exist in the world that don't need to be done through traditional biological processes? So for example, Ginkgo Bioworks has partnered with many companies on synthetic cannabinoid, which means you don't need to grow THC and actually grow marijuana plants. You can synthetically create it through genetic engineering and through DNA sequencing and through all the other processes like robotics and AI. All of this stuff kind of intersects, which is why it's in Cathie's wheelhouse. But DNA sequencing is kind of the core pillar there to be able to literally create weed. And if you can create weed and you don't have to grow weed, the financial implications of that, right? The market opportunity of that is just gigantic. And so that's the potential of Ginkgo Bioworks as a company, because they're building a platform for all of these synthetic biology companies, which is why they said they're adding 100 new startups on their portfolio in full year 2023 to be able to use their platform. What is their platform? It's a mix of robotics and a warehouse and all their facilities and machinery, all that stuff that's really hard to do, the thing that they built that is proprietary to them and that they really don't have any competition. No other company is doing exactly what they're doing in the way that they're doing, which is why if you're a biotech startup and you want to engage in something through synthetic biology and you don't have 5, 10, 15 million bucks, you can immediately use them. You can immediately send your samples to their lab. You can immediately begin in the process of figuring out how to build your product versus figuring out how to get the fundraising to try to build your product. And that's very exciting. Now, what are the business implications of this? If you create the app store, if you create the platform, and I know this because I have a startup trying to create a platform, Audia.io, it is an audio platform, you don't just become a content creator. You become the thing that holds all of the content for the creators. It's lucrative to be a successful YouTuber. It is way more lucrative to own YouTube because everyone creates content on YouTube and then you have a piece of the pie. If you came up with the idea, or if you're just a shareholder in Google, right? In the early days, because now Google is a little bit more mature. So Ginkgo saying, hey, we're not going to take any money from you. We'll take, minimal amounts of money to get started. We're going to take an equity in your company, an equity stake in your company. So the reason Cathie is excited about this is because the downstream effects, which they're not accounting for in full year 2023 in terms of revenue, is, let's say on your app store, you find an Amazon, you find a Google, you find a Facebook, you find a TikTok, you find a WhatsApp, you find a blah, 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 blah over the next 10 years. You really only need 5 or 6 companies to become gigantic synthetic biology companies, and you have an equity stake in them forever because you created the platform that allowed them to get started. It's almost like they're an incubator that's not just offering mentorship and guidance, but they're creating the technology. So it's much more than an incubator because they're actually allowing these companies to work in the first place. So they're providing a service and they get to have an equity stake because they get to provide that service. It does good in the world because it allows more companies to be formed, allows more companies to try. And it also makes a lot of good financial sense. There's like trillions of apps on the App Store that don't get downloaded. Apple and Google, they just need a couple apps to be a hit, and then everyone will use their platform, Apple or Google Play, to download those apps. And then when they're downloading those apps, they will be able to use those apps however they please. And obviously, Apple takes 30% cut from the money that you take when you download an app or when you buy something in the app. So there's so many different ways to monetize, but you've got to create the platform. Creating the platform is hard. The platform approach to a business is my favorite. It's why I like Palantir. It's why I like SoFi with their AWS, Galileo stuff of fintech. However, it's difficult because in this biotech space, because if these companies that are joining your platform don't work, meaning their drugs don't get approved by the FDA, their synthetic biology stuff doesn't actually pan out, then you wasted all that time and money helping them get started because now your equity stake doesn't mean anything. That's why I think Cathie's excited. ARK-G, I think, is going to be one of the best funds that returns if ARK does return anything over the next 5-10 years, because the level of research they put into understanding the genomic space, I think, in ARK's team is far beyond most companies. And DNA is one of the companies they're very bullish on because they see that platform is very hard to replicate. I've listened to a lot, I would say hundreds of hours of the CEO and management and original founding team talk about this problem. And these guys know what they're talking about. There's not like some BS scam they put over your head. There's real revenue to justify it. Now it's just a question of can they actually scale this over the next decade, which is why at $1.40, I'm like, if they figure out how to get a couple of companies to use their platform meaningfully well, do I see $1.40 going to $5? Do I see the market giving it a little bit of momentum because the market gave it momentum buying it at 15 a year and a half ago? I kind of do, right? And that's why I'm excited about this company. I'm not loading the boat because I still want to see what Q1 earnings look like and see some of the progress they're making there. But those are my overall thoughts for anyone who was wondering about the stock. I mean, I was bullish on the stock back in September. I sold it immediately when I realized that like the macro was getting really bad in October. And I was like, there's just no point to hold the stock. It's a biotech. It's not going to be treated correctly, which is the final thing I want to say. As much as I think the company has a lot of potential, I think Cathie even recognizes that biotechs are going to get killed by this macro. And Ginkgo's not a biotech, but it's going to be treated like a biotech because they haven't put up the numbers to justify that they're purely tech and not just associated with the risk that biology has in the intersections of that. So those are my thoughts on Ginkgo. At this point, I like the valuation, even though the valuation is even a little pricey. The only competition is like AR, ticker symbol ARMS, Amiris, but they're making products themselves in-house. They're not making a platform for other companies, which is why I never understood the bull case for that company. But in the synthetic biology plays, Ginkgo is pretty much alone doing it. And now it's just a question of, can they scale? Again, this is a risky one, but these are my thoughts on why I think Cathie is loading the boat. She has over 100 million shares of this company. All right, that's it. Thanks so much for listening and watching. Let me know your thoughts in the comments on what you think about Ginkgo Bioworks, and I will see you guys in the next one.